I think everybody in this room would like to get to Mars. I think that's a common agreement. But barring a miracle, every astronaut who ever set foot on the moon might be dead before America takes another step on the moon or goes to Mars. And that's a tragic legacy of current space policy. And that thought haunts me, as it should haunt you as well. We lost the dream as a nation, and we lost the momentum. When I'm doing radio shows, I've been asked, what's NASA doing now that the space program's been canceled? My response is, look up. 200 miles up, we've got a space station. We've got astronauts doing real work there. We've got commercial space ramping up. We've got so many things that are contributing to the space program. But the public perception is we failed, that we've given up. And when you look at what in particular China is doing, China is not waiting for us. China is building their SLS, their Long March 9. It looks amazingly like our SLS. As do a lot of the things that China makes. Their J-31 fighter looks like our F-35 fighter. It's the same plane. And so we're losing a race that we might not even think that exists, but it does exist. Russia has announced that they want to go to the moon. Europe has said they're going to the moon. In looking at some diagrams of the Chinese Long March 9, I saw an interesting thing on them because it listed the stats, the weight and things like that, how many tons to low Earth orbit, how many tons to lunar transfer orbit, and it also mentioned how many tons to Martian transfer orbit. They know where they're going. And they're going there. And so if we are not competitive, then we may be sitting back watching and waiting as NASA identifies the perfect asteroid and then launches the robot to go and get it. Meanwhile, China may already have their lunar base in operation and their new space station and many other things. And then we'll finally identify the right asteroid. We'll send off our robotic probe to get that, get a piece from that. And if it succeeds, which is a big if, there's so many ifs involved with that, then it'll bring it back, and sometime in the late 2020s, then we get a mission to go out and send a couple of people to chip off some pieces from it and bring them back to Earth. And that's our space program for the 2020s, which sets up what for the 2030s? Well, if we actually want to be going to Mars in the 2030s, we've got to be doing a lot more than one asteroid bits and pieces sampling mission and a couple other trips to distant lunar orbit. But that's all that's in the plans. I've searched NASA's website, and there's no timeline. This is our roadmap to Mars. This is how we'll get there. Or there's some PowerPoints, and they have lovely PowerPoints. And when I worked in Congress, I had the briefings, and they're beautiful, and they've got a hashtag, Journey to Mars. But back of that, there's no plan to get us there. There just isn't. You can talk to NASA engineers and they'll say, this is what we got to do. When behind closed doors and the political brass aren't there, they'll give their opinions. But we need to get back on track. So all we tend to do now is commemorate anniversaries of when we were doing great things. 20th, 30th, 40th, 50th. And soon it'll be the 60th anniversaries of our space feats. The last shuttle launch, I'll get radio show invitations when there's an anniversary of the last shuttle launch. See what I mean? So it's time to make new history, and we can celebrate that then with our own eyes rather than just looking back only at our past accomplishments. But the good news is we can have a fresh start in January. The day after the election, the winner will begin to formulate their space policy and select key advisors and staff. That's the countdown. On January 20th, it all goes into main launch sequence. The new administration will select a new NASA administrator and science advisor and the other top staff. And they'll have some, by that point, overall concept of where they want to go. Exactly what their long-term and short-term goals are. I was talking yesterday about the Mars flyby. That's one of my things I would like to see the next administration adopt because it's soon. It can happen far sooner than getting back 100 pounds of asteroid rock if that mission were to succeed. And it'll show the world and it'll show Americans that we really are back. It'll inspire us. It'll get the kids knocking down the STEM departments, the engineering departments here at Catholic and all around the world. And in the U.S. saying, I want to be part of it. What can I do? I can do programming. I can do, I'll rivet weld, and do welding on the rocket. Whatever it is, if we actually have a roadmap to get there, you'll find this university and so many others buzz with enthusiasm. So my recommendations, and these are entirely my recommendations, are that the president should go back, the new president, to the roots of our space program, partnering with commercial space, and set a strategy that will put us on a genuine, not hashtag and rhetorical course to Mars, the moon, and beyond. And then to declare that the asteroid mission is a 15-year detour from real space exploration and a multi-billion-dollar waste, and cancel that. You might have heard my remarks last night on that. The next president must declare where we will go and critically when, and then sell it to the American people in Congress. President Kennedy, of course, famously said that. If you have never seen a video of JFK giving that speech, we will go in this decade to the moon and bring a man safely back, you should watch it. And unfortunately, it's going to take that kind of attitude, that kind of leadership from a president in order to actually get us out of the apathy, get Congress to say, okay, NASA needs some more money to actually get us there, and to inspire the people that this is a goal worth supporting. Of critical importance is to have several crewed space missions of genuine interest to the public within the president's first term. Yeah, that's going to require a little bit more money to accelerate development of rockets and missions that will really mean something. Going out to lunar orbit as EM 3, 4, 5, and on are currently kind of penciled in as, and maybe running from there, picking up a controller and running a lunar rover from there to show that we're doing something is nice and gives us a little bit of science, but it won't actually put footsteps on Mars because it's not designed to. As Robert Zubrin was saying yesterday, build the habitats, build the spacecraft, things like that. And, if we're not doing that, if we're, making that spider thing to pick up that piece of an asteroid We're losing time. And time's one thing we don't have. You know, it's not that we're, as a nation, we couldn't do it in 20, 40, 50, 60, 70 or whatever, but we shouldn't, and other countries will be there first. We don't live in a vacuum. A lot of people don't see that in the space policy arena when I talk to them. China, as I said before, China is going, definite. You can count on them. They were not just being cute by putting Mars transfer orbit specs for their Long March 9 and lunar transfer orbits. And the fear is, if we cede control of space, if we sit back and wait for that perfect asteroid, and okay, good, we've got that, and now we're going to send out the spider thing to grab the piece, that space will become hostile to the free world. China is not part of the free world, and if we're to believe that they will not try to make a claim on ownership of the moon, then they're setting a very bad example in the South China Sea, where they're violating 400 years of freedom of the seas and saying, this is ours. You know, imagine if Italy or Greece or Libya or any country in the Mediterranean said, it's ours. The entire Mediterranean is ours. And yes, we're going to take, you know, right up to your beaches and so forth, and we're going to take islands that belong to you and whatnot. That's what's happening in the South China Sea, and if they're going to do that, then there's nothing to stop them from doing that to the moon. Now, you may be thinking, oh, that means guns on the moon. Well, no, they don't necessarily have to enforce a regime of we own the moon with guns on the moon. Although they are studying putting a military radar, a huge military radar installation on the moon that could cover the entire world every 24 hours. But all you got to do is just call up the president and say, guys, you're not going to the moon. If you go to the moon, you're not going to get rare earths, okay? Keep it a secret. Bye. Well, the way you can blow that out of the water is you just go public with it. And you say, China says they're going to retaliate if we go to the moon. Well, guess what? We're going to the moon anyway. You stick it in their face, and they really won't be able to do anything about it. If you're public about it, if you're secret, like, say, with the Iran deal, where everything was top secret from everybody except the president and the entirety of the Iranian government, then those threats stay active. So there's a greater world, and it's not necessarily a world that will be friendly to commercial space and space exploration. Here's one other point on that, and that is, if China and Russia and other space powers hostile to the concept of commerce and freedom dominate space, they will be in the position to dictate at the United Nations that anybody that does anything commercial in space, it's got to be divided up amongst all the nations. So just like with the Law of the Sea Treaty, one reason we should not be part of that. So if you go out and you sit down on an asteroid and you turn it into a little factory to make valuable items and minerals for building a space station or something, then the United Nations could say, because there is a majority of non-free and often unfriendly to the U.S. nations in the United Nations. It's political reality. So if we are not there in force, in space, on the moon, going to Mars, those that do will be the ones that write the rules. What would I do if I was president? Well, the first thing I would do, and this is going to sound maybe a little cynical, but it's real world politics. Commission a commission. Seriously, in Washington, commissions are created for only one purpose: to give you the results you want in a sanitized, independent, and authoritative form, so you can do what you need to do. Oh, there's a second reason for having a commission. It's to do nothing and say you're doing something. Well, we're studying that. The President Obama's Augustine Commission delivered its verdict that human space exploration was somehow unsustainable. And that word has been echoed by about everybody in space policy, whether they're conscious of it or not. Oh, this has to be sustainable. Well, it wasn't. There was no real, it was a national policy that we would do certain things and that we would fund them sufficiently until the commission comes along and gives the idea that, oh, it could be something that's not sustainable. Well, we have a Social Security system that's going bankrupt. We have medical costs that are going bankrupt and all these other things that cost huge amounts. And guess what? Nobody says, well, they're unsustainable and we need to somehow, for that reason, we have to cut everybody off Social Security, medical care, Medicaid, everything like that. We don't do that. If it's a national priority, we'll do it. And if it's a national priority, we might look and say, okay, the space program is, approximately this much of the federal budget, less than 0.5% of the federal budget. And if you all have listened to Neil deGrasse Tyson, and if you just type in Neil deGrasse Tyson, you will find some awesome videos. The guy is a riot, and he is the ambassador of space, I call him. First thing I did practically when I went to work in Congress was I introduced him to my boss, and they got along famously. But what does he say? He says, double the budget. How about 1 cent for space? So instead of this much, it's this much. Still, that's the budget, and so we're just saying, okay, couldn't we have that for space? Because space is not really a cost. If you look at so many things in government, they're expenses. But spaces, as people in this room, but not necessarily everybody watching around the world know, space is an investment. It returns so much in benefits to our society. It returns inventions, intellectual property, everything that helped make our nation the high-tech powerhouse of the world. Imagine if there was no Apollo and no overriding need to take a computer the size of this building and shrink it down to something that would fit in a spacecraft so you can go to the moon. It's possible that the high-tech revolution might have, in the 60s and the 70s, it might have ended up in Germany and then maybe Japan. It's not necessarily a certainty that we would have remained the leader in space. So it's an investment in our society. And for that reason, I hope both candidates for president will be supporting it for those reasons, as well as many more. Now back to the Augustine Commission. In fairness, it did have other conclusions. However, the administration chose to ignore that in taking off the books any plans to go to Mars and the moon. And what they did was, and I'm quoting science advisor John Holdren, we scaled human exploration back to the point that there was enough money to revitalize Earth observation, climate change. That's true. That went up, and human exploration went down, or was flat. To revitalize planetary science, false. That stayed absolutely flat. And to think about new missions, this is his quote, to think about new missions. So we're reducing human exploration to think about new missions. Well, trust me, nobody sat for 8 years thinking about Apollo. They built rockets and launched astronauts. So a little bit more on what the few minutes left, the next president could be doing. As I said, cancel the asteroid mission, double the budget. Offer major support for SpaceX's Red Dragon landing on Mars. I'm not sure if he'll be able to do that in 2018 while he's getting back to flight status, but that's something that NASA should be cooperating with. And I'd encourage everybody here to, that if you have a CubeSat or some Mars experiment idea, write that up and get that to Musk. Maybe it could be in there, because I'm sure that they'll have quite a few slots that are available. Designate a Mars sample return. 2020 rover, it's going to collect the stuff. But then it's just going to sit them there on the surface of Mars. And they could sit there until a meteorite blows them away if we don't get those back. No sample return, no footsteps on Mars, because we need to really know more about things like perchlorates and any other toxins that we'd better know about before somebody inhales the dust of. Prioritize closed-loop life support system and everything that's needed for Mars and so forth. Target 2025 to begin construction of a small lunar base. That will help us get to Mars by allowing us to make all the mistakes and learn all the lessons here, much closer and cheaper. And then make a real roadmap, just like there was originally with Constellation, of where we'll go. Sell that to the American people, sell it to Congress, get it funded, and I think we'll be seeing footsteps a lot sooner than we think possible. But last thing is you. That's right. Contact the campaigns. Between now and November 8th, they're going to be everywhere, and so you know, talk to them, talk to their staff, call the campaigns, and so forth, and say space should be a priority for the new administration, and then Congress too, because President can propose and the Congress can dispose. So make, and particularly the members of the space subcommittees, make sure that they know. And guess what? Somebody in the middle, representing the middle of Nebraska or something, he's got a space state too. Don't think that you've got to have a NASA center or a SpaceX or other center there to make it a space state. Believe me, every farmer in Nebraska and Kansas, he gets his GPS data. He gets his satellite weather mapping and so forth. He's as much of a fan of space whether he knows it or not. And so, so those folks, members from those states, should get as much attention, maybe even more, so that they'll realize space is in the vital interest. In the 30 seconds, I'll take one question.
You spent some time, sir, talking about what the president should do in terms of space, but you kind of left open the how to convince Congress and the public. What would you advise the next president to do that?
Well, how to do that, you know, in the Mars Society has, and other groups have annual blitzes where people go to congressional offices. Call your congressman.
No, for the president.
Oh, for the president? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, case for Mars. There we go. Amen. You got to do a in this decade type of talk to inspire the American people, and then the president's got to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue and say, "Hey guys, let's do this." Thank you all so very much.